All right, it is 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. Can I please have CalRecycle staff turn on their webcam so I can introduce you to our audience members? So while we are all getting our webcams turned on, my name is Julia Doloff, and I am part of the SB 1383 team. So before we dive into the SB 1383 Recycling and Disposal Reporting System, or RDRS for short, Reporting Requirements webinar, I'd like to introduce you to who is presenting and available for questions today. And Cameron, if you could pause the screen share, that would be wonderful. So presenting today from our policy office, and please give a wave, is Cameron Zargar. And accompanying him are Dan Brown, Laura Sanchez, and Stephen Sander, also from our policy office. We have Kara Morgan, who is our branch chief with the Local Assistance and Market Development branch here today as well, along with Ashley Yee, our SB 1383 Program Implementation Manager, also here to answer questions. And finally, we have our local assistance team members, Ray Carranza and Roberta Goldenpenny, moderating the question and answer session today. For today's webinar, we will review the new requirements outlined in the SB 1383 regulations for facilities to measure and report organic materials to CalRecycle, and we will cover the accompanying changes to RDRS. We hope this webinar will help you understand these requirements better. And if you have additional questions or clarifications, attendees will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar, and we will be posting the recording and presentation once we've made them ADA compliant. I will now hand it over to Cameron for his presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. I really appreciate that, and thank you for everyone for joining us. As Julia mentioned, this webinar will cover SB 1383 Recycling and Disposal Reporting System reporting requirements. Please note that CalRecycle anticipates putting on another webinar or training video close to start of reporting describing in greater detail the material covered in this webinar. The disclaimer is included in each document and specifies that the use of these documents is optional and not an enforceable regulatory requirement and do not ensure regulatory compliance if they are used. Please read the disclaimer in its entirety before using any of the documents discussed in this webinar. Some instructions for a Q&A session. After this morning's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. Now I will briefly cover some of the Q&A instructions so you know what to expect. If you're using the GoToWebinar platform and would like to ask a question, please type your question into the questions pane. We will not be using the raise hand function. If you are watching the webinar via the Cal EPA broadcast, please email your question to the SLCP inbox. For either platform, you may send in questions at any point during the webinar. Questions and comments regarding the merit of the regulations were responded to during the rulemaking period. So today we will focus on questions or clarifications regarding implementation and tools. The purpose of this presentation is to highlight the entities and data required to be reported via RDRS to comply with SB 1383 regulations regarding organic material recovery. The reporting will commence with the first RDRS reporting period in 2022 and every reporting period thereafter. The presentation will cover SB 1383 regulation sections that pertain to RDRS reporting requirements for haulers, transfers processors, and recycling and composting facilities and operations. Once the material in the presentation has been covered, we will open up the webinar for questions. Please note that SB 1383 RDRS reporting only applies to entities that are required to report pursuant to AB 901. If you are not registered in RDRS and need to assess if you are required to report pursuant to AB 901, please navigate to the following links. SB 1383 regulations that cover RDRS reporting requirements are covered in Chapter 9, Article 9.25, and Sections 18815.4 for haulers, 18815.5 for transfer processors, and 18815.7 for recycling and composting facilities and operations. Now I will cover the SB 1383 RDRS reporting requirements for the various entities. Haulers do not need to report additional information to RDRS, but are required to identify at the time of delivery for all material delivered to each receiving reporting entity whether the material is collected from a source separated organic waste collection stream or from a mixed waste organic collection stream. Transfer processors receiving mixed waste collection stream for the purpose of determining the annual average organic content recovery rate must report to CalRecycle via RDRS the total organics recovered during the 10-day measurement period, total organics sent to disposal during the 10-day measurement period, and the sum of daily records for the quarter of the following: the outgoing weights of material recovered, outgoing weights of material sent to disposal, and incoming weight of mixed waste stream. The panel on the left shows in greater detail the calculations that are required to generate the data for RDRS. A link to this supporting document is available in the relevant link slide later in the presentation. Transfer processors receiving source-separated collection stream for the purpose of determining the annual average organic content recovery rate must report to CalRecycle via RDRS total organics recovered during the 10-day measurement period, total organics sent to disposal during the 10-day measurement period, and the sum of daily records for the quarter of the following: outgoing weights of material recovered, outgoing weights of material sent to disposal, incoming weight of source-separated waste stream. Again, the panel on the left shows in greater detail the calculations that are required to generate the data for RDRS. A link to this supporting document is also available in the relevant link slide later in the presentation. Additionally, transfer processors may also need to report on a quarterly basis the average ratio of remnant organic waste to non-organic waste measured in the gray container waste evaluation samples performed by the facility pursuant to section 17409.5.7. An overview of the gray container waste evaluation. An operator or facility that receives a gray container collection stream and more than 500 tons of solid waste from at least one jurisdiction annually shall conduct waste evaluations on the gray container collection stream once per quarter. Please see section 17409.5.7 for more details on the gray container waste evaluation overview. Recycling and composting facilities and operations shall, if applicable, additionally report the following to the department on a quarterly basis: the percentage of organic waste contained in materials sent to landfill disposal as calculated pursuant section 17869E1 or 17896A1. Once again, appropriate supporting document for this requirement can be found on the relevant link slide of this presentation. This page provides web links for information and detailed sampling guidance for transfer processing facilities and information and detailed sampling guidance for recycling and compost facilities. Thank you for your attention during this presentation. Please note again that CalRecycle anticipates putting on another webinar or training video close to the start of reporting describing in greater detail the materials covered in this webinar. As a reminder, please use the instructions shown on this slide for the Q&A session. CalRecycle staff will unmute participants in order the questions came in. You will need to unmute yourself on your end when asked by the CalRecycle staff. Please state your affiliation before asking your question. CalRecycle staff may respond to some questions in writing through GoToWebinar. We will verbalize some of these written responses for everyone to hear. With that, I'll hand it over to our Q&A helper, Rhea and Roberta, to start us off. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Cameron, for your wonderful presentation. It's very quick and snappy, so we have plenty of time for Q&A. We do have one question in the question pane so far, and I'll just cover very briefly the first two that have already come in. And those were regarding the links and whether this PowerPoint will be provided. Yes, we will post the presentation. If you need the links right away, just put your email in the question pane or shoot an email to the SLCP inbox and we'll send you those links straight away. So with that, we have our first question from Alana, and I will hand it over to Ray to moderate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, so as you mentioned, the first question is from Alana Lowry. We are going to go ahead and unmute you on our end. If you could just state your name, affiliation, and re-ask your question. You are now unmuted.
Hi, good morning. By recycling facilities and operations, you mean single stream recycling facilities, correct?
Yes, it's single stream. Please feel free to chime in, Stephen, to correct me if I'm wrong.
Hi, yes, Steve Sander, CalRecycle Policy Office. Thank you for the question, Alana. Recycling facilities and operations, yeah, that is defined in 18815.2 and point 3. And in point 3, it discusses essentially that if you are a facility that engages in recycling and then sends or sells or transfers 100 tons or more of reportable materials per quarter, or 2,500 tons if it's exclusively CDI recycling or construction, demolition, and inert debris. And you don't otherwise have a solid waste facilities permit, either as a transfer processor or some other kind of solid waste facility, excluding compostable material handling facility. So essentially, recycling facilities and operations are activities that engage in recycling but don't otherwise require a solid waste facilities permit to operate by their own activities, if that helps. So happy to discuss that a little bit further, but yeah, you'll want to take a look at, again, 18815.3 of Title 14, Article 9.25 is the recycling and disposal reporting system regulations.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Our next question is from Thomas Patrone. Thomas, you have a few on here, so I'm going to unmute one and see if that's the right one. If you can, please state your affiliation and ask your question.
Yeah. If you're strictly a hauler, are there any reporting requirements? So if in other words, if you're taking your organics to an organics facility, are the haulers themselves actually having to get on RDRS and do reporting also?
Hi, Thomas. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I'm happy to take it, Cameron. So yeah, if you're not otherwise obligated to report through the AB 901 regulations, you wouldn't be required to register and report pursuant to, the 1383 reporting, what Cameron just outlined. So essentially, haulers contract haulers who only haul in-state, with the exception of to direct land application, don't have to report. It's only haulers who haul 100 tons or more out of state, or 50 tons or more to direct land application in any particular quarter, would reporting in RDRS be required.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Cameron. Next question is from Marcus Lee. Marcus, we're going to go ahead and unmute you. If you could state your name, affiliation, and re-ask your question. You are now unmuted on our end.
Hi, so this is Marcus Lee from Union Sanitary District, and it's kind of piggybacking on that last question. I was wondering, do wastewater plants that produce biosolids have to report as well, or will they be covered in the hauling portion of the report?
Hey, Marcus, thank you for the question. So wastewater treatment plants are covered in the RDRS reporting requirements under recycling and composting facilities. So if a facility produces biosolids and then that is sent off-site, there is a reporting requirement, provided that the facility sends 100 tons off-site per quarter. And you're welcome to contact us, and we can set you up if there's a need to report in the system.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great question.
All right, our next question is from Catherine Cross. Catherine, you are unmuted. Feel free to unmute and state your affiliation and ask your question.
Okay, this is Catherine Cross with Orange County LEA. I was just wondering, will LEAs have access to the RDRS information in their jurisdiction? And if so, when will this data be available? I have one additional question based on some stuff as well.
Hey, Catherine, thank you so much. So LEAs in the context of an inspection certainly could ask a facility to produce, their RDRS reports, as that is part of the record keeping requirements that we have in place pursuant to this reporting system. So we definitely would want to strategize and see how we can definitely kind of like check against one another for completeness and so on, in terms of the facilities completing their reporting requirements. Where we can also send copies of RDRS quarterly report submissions to the LEA, although there may be certain redactions that might need to be performed. We would have to check with our legal about that. And then failing that, there's public reports that you can use, and we can provide a link to that, where it shows on a facility specific basis, how many tons they they sent to disposal, and what some of the numbers that they're reporting pursuant to the the RDRS requirements.
Okay, and that would be great. And while I on that topic, I think Cameron touched on like construction and inert debris kind of things, and we have a lot of that going on right now, and we've got a lot of them talking about being recyclers, but it'd be nice to know if they're really in that system as well, because they seem to not be in certain systems at all.
Yeah, excellent. We'd love to, again, strategize with you about making sure that everyone who needs to be in the system is in there and reporting if there's a need to do so. So,
Okay.
yeah, happy to reach out to you offline and we can definitely talk about that. Yeah, happy to do that. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
The next question is from Carlos Chavez, who does not have a mic, so I will go ahead and read it. They ask, are gray container evaluations required for 100% of gray container waste we receive, or only for that portion that comes from a jurisdiction that sends us over 500 tons?
I'll take this one. Per the 1383 regulations and the way they're currently written, if your facility receives 500 or more tons annually, so for the whole year, then you are required to do a gray waste evaluation. I don't know if 1383 folks can shed some more light on that, but from what I read, that is the
Hey, Cameron, thanks so much. That was Cameron, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Hey, thanks so much. So to answer that, to add on to Cameron's response, so it's not by jurisdiction that you're doing it for. So it's the trigger is if that facility receives 500 tons or more from any jurisdiction, then they must conduct the gray container evaluations as it's laid out in that regulation. There is no reporting that goes back to the jurisdiction for that gray container waste eval. Big picture, the reason we have this in the regulations is this data will help inform CalRecycle if we're seeing, a lot of organic waste still in the gray container. So it's going to be a data point for us to assess how effective the programs are and how we're doing statewide. So let me know if that helped answer the question. Thanks so much.
And this is Julia. Before we jump into the next question, Cameron and Steve, could I have you turn on your webcams when you answer the questions, just so folks know who's talking to them? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julia. Our next question comes from Joe Tobin. Joe, you have been unmuted. Please state your affiliation and ask your question.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So again, my name is Joe Tobin. I'm the director for the ATCA Food Bank here in Tuolumne County. And we're just wondering how this all applies to us as a food bank. We don't receive any waste. We do have, a garbage dumpster and a recycle dumpster, and we do have food here that ages out and we dispose of it. But most oftentimes it goes to local farmers. We very rarely put anything other than just cardboard boxes in the recycling, or plastic stretch wrap that comes off of pallets into the garbage can, broken pieces of pallets. But we're a small facility, and I just want to see how this ties into us.
I can take this one. Thank you. I would just say that, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, if you are required to report an AB 901, then you must also do these additional reporting regarding 1383 regulation. If you are not required to report under AB 901, then this does not pertain to you. That's a general answer. If you would like to find out if you need to report, those are the links we provided earlier in the presentation. Please go ahead. But please, again, this is only pertains to folks who are required to report under AB 901. I hope that answers your questions. If you need more clarification, please reach out. Be happy to help.
Yeah, that's great. How can I get to those links again? I tried to click on the links and it's just like a shared screen. I don't know how to get to those.
Sure, we can, Julia?
Yeah, so I think what we're gonna do, because we might not be able to get this PowerPoint presentation posted today, so I think our best course of action is we will send out a listserv message on the SLCP listserv and the RDRS listserv so that everyone, so over almost 500 people here today, will have access to those links today after the webinar. So hopefully that will help everyone out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Julia. Our next question is from Ruben Hernandez. Hi, Ruben. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. If you could just state your name, remind everybody of your affiliation, and ask your question. We are now unmuting you from our end. Okay, Ruben, if you're not there, I'll go ahead and ask the question for you. This is from Ruben Hernandez with Marin Sanitary Service. The reporting requirements for recycling facilities also cover recycling facilities that have a dual system recycling system. And I believe this was for Stephen Sander, who touched on that in the chat.
Hi, yes, thanks for the question, Ruben. From what I understand, that's a reasonably correct interpretation. Every system is a bit different. I think I answered you privately. So it's hard to say, like, make a blanket statement saying every dual stream recycling facility is a recycling and composting facility or operation as defined in the AB 901 regulations. So, you know, every circumstance is a little bit different, but to the extent, you know, they're receiving source separated material that's under 10% contaminated. The facility otherwise meets aspects of the 3-part test and doesn't require a solid waste facilities permit to operate on its own standalone. You know, that's again a reasonably correct interpretation to have, though. Yeah, every circumstance is different, but happy to follow up in more detail. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Our next question comes from Paul, and I apologize if I mispronounce your last name, Paul Frund. You have been unmuted. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question and state your affiliation, please.
Excellent. Yes, Paul Freund with the Tehama County Solid Waste Management Agency. I was curious because our facility accepts carpet and textiles, which can have organic carpet and organics in the textiles that are self-hauled to us, but we don't collect it as part of a source separated organic waste collection stream. We're wondering if carpet and textiles that are self-hauled to our facility also have to be sampled as well. Did you hear me?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Hey, Paul, I'll start. I feel like your question would be a question we should tee up for our solid waste facility team to talk about measurement of that particular stream, unless Cameron or Stephen want to weigh in, but that would be my suggestion. Cameron, Stephen?
Stephen, I don't have anything additional to add. Thank you, Kara.
No, I agree, Kara. Yeah, I think we'll have the solid waste facilities team folks follow up with you on that.
Perfect.
One.
So Paul, if you could provide us your contact information, we'll be sure to do a follow-up. Thanks so much for the question.
Okay, just one last part of that is if we are supposed to sample carpet and textiles, are the contaminants non-carpet and non-textiles, or are they non-organic textiles and non-organic carpets, and how do we sample that? And of course, you know, we could wait till the solid waste facilities team gets back to us on the other question and a follow-up to that.
Yeah, both of those. I'd like to tee up the conversation with the SWIFT team because I think we can go over some of those pieces and what specifically needs to be measured, not measured. How do you deal with material types that are composites, like carpet, right? Part of it is inorganic, part of it might be organic, part of it you may not be able to tell at all. So we can cover all of that in a follow-up.
Okay, great. So I should put my contact info in the chat?
Yeah, please.
Oh,
Thanks so
okay.
much, Paul.
Excellent.
And we'll try and get that set up in the next week, not more than 2 weeks, but we'll try and shoot for the next week.
That'd be very helpful as we're coming up close on January 1.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much. You may, as we have the conversation, have other questions about measurement at your facility so we can tackle them then.
Perfect. Thank you, Kara. Next question is from Alicia McCutcheon. You are now unmuted on our end. Name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Alicia McCutcheon with Redwood Landfill in Marin County. Sorry if I missed the explanation, but what is the 10-day period you were referencing?
Thank you so much for your question. The 10-day evaluation that we're referring to is per quarter a facility is required to basically take a 200-pound sample from their waste that's coming in after processing, and in a general sense, not to get into the details, look at how much organics is left in the 200-pound sample after processing and how much is being sent to the landfill for us or for the department to deduce how efficient the facility is at separating organics from material being sent to disposal.
Hey,
Kara,
Cameron, I think a point of clarification would be that we're talking about transfer processing facilities.
Yes.
And I think that this person is with a landfill. So there are not specific measurements at landfills. So were you asking about a transfer processing facility that you manage or the landfill?
We do have a composting facility here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the composting facility, and Cameron, we could talk about that. There are specific measurement requirements on the back end for composting facilities. And we can, in the chat, put the link to the regulation sections for the measurements that are required on that. But for your landfill operations, what Cameron was referencing, the 10-day measurement, et cetera, that is not regarding landfills. Did that help?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. And if you'd like, if you give us your contact information, we can have after the meeting, we can send you out. We have some really good schematics that explain the measurement at various facilities. And we also have a previous video from some of our technical training series webinars that we can share with you as well that will help you with knowing what you need to do at the composting facility. And Cameron, now that we know that she's referencing a compost facility, is there anything in particular you want to needs to be highlighted for RDRS?
No, I mean, if it applies to them, then yes, they do need to report. Again, it's not it's the percentage that we're requiring to be reported, not all the data that is collected, and depending on if you are a composting facility or in-vessel digestion, those are two different protocols for them to gather that data. And that is in the presentation, which we'll be posting, and you can look those up within the regulations to figure out those specifics.
All right, thank you, Kara and Cameron. Our next question is from Veronica Pardo. Veronica, you have been unmuted, but you are still self-muted, so unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Yes, Veronica Pardo, Resource Recovery Coalition of California. I had a couple clarifying questions. One was actually about the wastewater treatment plants that will be required to report biosolids. My clarifying question is, are these wastewater treatment plants that accept MSW organic waste, or are we referencing all wastewater treatment plants?
Hey, Veronica, thanks so much for the question. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, wastewater treatment plants are in basically the who's in list in AB 901 regulations as recycler composters in that section 18815.3 that I brought up earlier. And so generally speaking, if these facilities engage in recycling of organics, and then they send out 100 tons or more of intermediate bio products, of which biosolids would be, a constituent. And on a quarterly basis, they would need to report, although there are a few special circumstances.
Okay.
But generally speaking, yeah.
Okay, great. That helps me. And then I am also curious about the audience question regarding the acceptance of carpet in textiles. I was reviewing the regulations around this, but my recollection is that carpet and textiles are not considered for the purposes of organic waste calculation and organic waste, but I see that more under the composting section and the in-vessel digestion section. So for facilities that are accepting or are part of a carpet program, I thought we were covering that under that particular program. But I think it would be great to get some clarity on that on your Q&A page around specifically carpet and textiles. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Veronica, thanks so much for that point. Again, we don't have our solid waste facilities team on today, so we'll do a follow-up and definitely will think about adding that frequently asked question because it sounds like it's needed. And I don't even know if it's up there, so I'll have to look. Thanks so much for the suggestion.
Okay, next question is from Kayla Thompson, who is no longer logged in, so I will go ahead and read it. They are from the San Diego Food Bank, and they ask, are there reporting requirements required for facilities with an on-site composting facility? If so, what information need to be included in that reporting?
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think I'll sort of tee it up and then I can pass it over to Cameron. So there, when you say on-site composting facility, it really it depends on if it's the de minimis tonnage threshold. If that on-site composting facility produces 100 tons or more, finished organics or and solid waste, just all of the products and things that are produced there. If it exceeds 100 tons a quarter, they would need to report pursuant to the AB 901 regulations. There are certain, again, exceptions for certain types of composting operations. So you'll definitely want to consult the that tool that Cameron sent out or referenced earlier in the presentation, the Do I Need to Register in RDRS tool. So that asks a series of questions, and it should arrive at a determination of whether or not your composting facility should be included pursuant to the AB 901 regulations. And again, recall that SB 1383 requirements only pertain to facilities that otherwise, are included in the 901 reporting requirements.
All right. Our next question comes from Dave Lee. Dave, you've been unmuted. You are self-muted. Please unmute yourself, state your affiliation, and ask your questions. Okay, I'll go ahead and ask the first of Dave's questions. How will you determine within the system who should report? How will you determine who is a transfer processor and who is a consolidation transfer station?
I apologize. I accidentally used Dave's link. Apparently, this is Christine Williamson from the Kern County Public Works Department.
Hi, Christine. Thanks.
So yes, I was asking, how will you determine within the system who should report? And mostly asking about, determining transfer processors versus consolidation transfer stations. I did have a second question that kind of leads from some of the answers to that question in terms of, transfer stations that only accept waste from census tracts that have been waived out due to low population, whether or not, they are still going to need to report in the system as well.
Hey, Christine, thank you so much. Great to hear from you. Thanks for being on the call. So in regards to your first question, so in terms of reporting requirements for SB 1383, all transfer processing facilities submitting reports in RDRS will be asked whether they handle source separated organics or mixed waste organics. And depending on if they check, one or both of those boxes, they'll be required to provide additional information, regarding the sampling and those other reporting requirements outlined by Cameron. So I guess if it's a situation where the facility isn't actually processing organics, I don't think they would be required to answer those questions. So I hope that helps. And then in reference to your second question about the low population, I don't think that, except I'm going to defer to Kara, but I don't think that if they exclusively take from low population jurisdictions that precludes them from having to do it, but I'll turn it over to Kara.
Yeah, Stephen, thanks for clarifying. So with those consolidation sites, right, as Stephen noted, they aren't required to conduct the measurement. The measurements are done at those transfer processing facilities that are measuring. So again, if you're not doing the measurements at a consolidation site, you're not reporting an RDRS. So thanks so much, Stephen. And so while a jurisdiction may have a waiver or an exemption under low population, rural exemption, or elevation waivers, the facilities are still required to conduct the appropriate measurements and report in RDRS. So there's no exclusion for the facilities. Hope that answered your question.
Yes and no. These are also, I mean, it's Kern County, what can I say? We have lots of different types of facilities. But, like there is one of our little tiny transfer stations up in the mountains that accepts waste, but they put it in a compactor, which is compaction. And so under the definitions, that was changing the waste was considered processing. And so, that was one of our questions we tried to put forward to the solid waste team, was whether or not that was considered a transfer processor or a consolidation site. It's all solid waste mixed together. However, it is 500 tons a year almost, or right about, from Kern unincorporated areas. But again, that's the only processing that happens on site, and it's in an area that is highly likely to get waivered. All of the waste coming in, there's nothing coming in from any kind of collection system. It's all self-hauled by the residents who live up in those mountains. We have all sorts of other different situations, but that was one of the main ones I was thinking of.
Yeah, and did you get the response from the solid waste facilities team on that? Or are you still waiting for a response?
It was kind of thrown back to us to kind of talk with our LEA, and it's kind of gone around.
Okay. Well, let us know if you would like us to set up a follow-up meeting with our team and the solid waste facilities team to add some clarity to the response that you received. I'm happy to do so. I do hear you. I don't know for sure because I don't have all the details. So if that facility is required to conduct the measurements, even though it's way out there and it's just taking self-haul material, it may be. So without having the details and being a part of the conversation, I really can't say. So let us know if you want us to do a follow-up. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Kara. Sean Debley, you are up next. You are unmuted on our end. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi, good morning. Sean Debley, Ventura County LEA. I just had a question in regards to regional transfer stations that receive material from multiple jurisdictions on any given day. How is the information that those facilities that they're reporting going to be used specifically for the jurisdictions, or is that information not transferable over to jurisdiction data? Does that make sense?
Sean, thank you for your question. Really appreciate it. In regards to reporting in RDRS, material that the facility receives or sends out, we have in the RDRS system places where the jurisdiction that sends you material or where the material came from is indicated, so that information is captured in RDRS, and that eventually moves along to, forgive me, correct me if I'm wrong, Kara and Stephen, to the electronic annual reporting. So definitely, if you are required to report in RDRS and you do report as a transfer processor, that information, as far as jurisdictional information, is captured within RDRS.
Hey, Cameron, just add a point of clarification. We're talking about disposal gets reported by jurisdiction of origin, but material that is recovered does not. Can you add some clarity to that? Or Stephen?
Stephen, please.
Sure, yeah, that is important, and this essentially comes from the statute, authorizing RDRS and so on. It makes a distinction between how materials to be reported if it's solid waste versus on the recycling side. So yeah, Kara is correct that disposal is to be reported upon by jurisdiction of origin. However, the recovered organics, that's not subject to being reported on by jurisdiction of origin, but rather material type. And I guess I had a little bit different take on your question, Sean. It was the way I understood it is, let's say a facility is not able to meet a certain recovery efficiency. How is that going to go back to the jurisdiction? And I'm wondering, yeah, Kara, do you have any insight on sort of that process there?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point if that was the question. So when we're talking about performance requirements, we're talking about high diversion organic waste processing facilities that take and process material from a single container, unsegregated container collection system, or the gray container of a 2-container collection system. Also, performance requirements are placed on designated source-separated organic waste processing facilities, and that is a facility that a jurisdiction that has a performance-based collection system must use that type of facility. So that facility has to meet performance requirements. So the way that this will be is, as the data is reported into RDRS, our team on the back end will be tracking that and running those calculations in about, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think about mid-2023 is when we will start publishing lists of those facilities that are meeting the performance requirements. And we'll keep that list updated every quarter. The reason for waiting to publish the list until about first or second quarter of 2023 is we do need to wait to receive 4 quarters worth of data. And that's going to kind of cover 2022. So sometime first quarter, second quarter of 2023, we'll be publishing those lists. That is the way that jurisdictions will know from CalRecycle if the facility to which they're sending their materials is meeting that performance requirement for either high diversion organic waste processing facilities, which are for certain types of collection systems, or a designated source separated organic waste processing facility that is really only for jurisdictions that are performance-based collection systems, which we don't know that we'll have any jurisdictions choosing that. That's that Article 17 where that's laid out. So we may not have any of those to start, but maybe over time we'll have more jurisdictions. Dan?
No, you're absolutely right. That information would be available like May 1-ish of 2023, as soon as we had that first year data available and processed. So yeah, no, you nailed it.
Sean, let us know if we answered your questions, because as you could tell, Stephen and I were kind of like, maybe you're asking this, maybe you're asking that. So we tried to hit all the bases. So can you let us know if we addressed it for you?
Yes, actually, Stephen was more in line with what I was questioning in regards to that performance measure for facilities that say they don't meet the mark. How does that transfer to the jurisdiction was my question, as far as how you're going to hold them accountable. But yeah, you kind of did a broad swath there and did cover several parts of it, so I appreciate that.
You bet. Thanks so much. So just to wrap that up in a neat package, once we start reporting on the facilities that meet the high diversion organic waste processing facility, so for those jurisdictions that have single unsegregated collection systems or 2-container collection systems, if the facility that they're sending material to is not meeting the performance requirement, then we will be communicating with that jurisdiction. And there is an enforcement process laid out in Article 3 of the regulations, which provides the jurisdiction with an opportunity to make some choices. For example, they could send their material to another high diversion organic waste processing facility. The facility they're using could potentially make some changes and then be able, maybe some equipment changes and whatnot, to be able to meet the performance requirement, or they would implement a 3-container collection system. So CalRecycle would be communicating to that jurisdiction that is identified and communicate to CalRecycle that they have either a 2-container collection service or a single unsegregated. So just wrap up that package. That's how the information will be communicated to the jurisdictions. And if there is their facility not meeting the performance requirement, then CalRecycle would be working with the jurisdiction to address that particular situation. There's no issue with regards to the facility. It's about the jurisdiction having to make some changes. Thanks so much.
Thanks for all that, Kara and team. Our next question comes from Lisa, and I apologize for butchering your last name. I'm going to pronounce it as Solho. You are unmuted. Please state your name and your affiliation and ask your question.
Thank you. This is Lisa Coelho from R3 Consulting, and I was wondering if there were any reporting requirements for entities that are backhauling or self-hauling, such as grocery stores.
Thank you for your question, Lisa. I'll say what was said during the presentation, which is, again, if you're required to report in AB 901, then this pertains to you. And I think the best and the quickest way to figure out if you do need to report AB 901 is to use those links that were provided. Additionally, we're always here to help answer any questions because we know that not everything is always cut and dry. And you can send your emails to the RDRS team, and we'd be happy to help you. But I think the first step to get a pretty solid answer is to use that if I need to register an AB 901 tool that we have available to you. I hope that does provide some help and clarity.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks. And yeah, I agree with Cameron. The best way is to use that tool. And I'll just throw out, there's a shortened version of that link, the Do I Need to Register tool. It's tinyurl.com/RDRS-tool. That's tinyurl.com/RDRS-tool. That will take you to the questionnaire, the tool that you can use to assess whether or not your facility, your business facility or operation would be required to register and report. And then there's AB 901, but since you mentioned this, AB 1103 specifically does pertain to food waste self-haulers. I believe the threshold requiring reporting would be 13 cubic yards of their own food waste taken to a facility or operation not owned or operated by them. There are some specific provisions in there. So, but the tool will help analyze that aspect of the reporting requirements as well. So, thanks for the question.
Thank you very much. That's what I was wondering about.
Thank you, Stephen. Chris Lehone, sorry if I mispronounced that. You are now unmuted on our end. It looks like you have a couple of questions there. So if you would like to ask both, you now have the forum. You're self-muted, Chris. Maybe we lost you. So Chris asks, per 901 CalRecycle webpage, these facilities report quarterly. Recycling facilities, composting facilities, disposal facilities, including landfills, transformation facilities, engineered municipal solid waste conversion facilities, transfer processor facilities, contract haulers, food waste, self-haulers, brokers, and transporters. Can either of you verify this?
Hey, Chris, I'm not sure. I didn't catch the question, but that is, the list that's on the AB 901 or the RDRS webpage. If you go to our website and type in RDRS, that will, and then click on the first link. That's the easiest way to get to our RDRS reporting webpage, and from there you can examine you can get into the system and you can assess whether or not you're required to report.
All right, thank you for that, Stephen. Our next question comes from David Briggs. David, you are unmuted. Please state your affiliation and ask your question.
Okay, hi, Dave Briggs. I'm with Napa County. And the question I had, I'm approaching this really as a recycling coordinator, not a facility operator. But yeah, I'm a little concerned about how we inform self-haulers what they need to do and where they may go. So yeah, I'm not very clear on that just yet, but I think we really need to emphasize that. We have a lot of self-haulers locally. So my question is, if a self-hauler does not segregate their load before they take it to a transfer station, that's not a high diversion facility, for instance, what are the transfer station operators required to do? At the gate, would they just turn self-haulers away who have a mixed load?
Hi, David. I will start and other team members may follow, but we may need to do a follow-up because so I'm going to talk about what the jurisdiction's responsibilities are pursuant to the regulations. These are the 1383 short-lived climate pollutant regulations and not AB 901. So local jurisdictions in Article 7 are required to have an enforceable ordinance. That ordinance needs to include requirements on self-haulers on what they need to do in that jurisdiction. So that allows a jurisdiction, should it need to, the enforcement ability if it's necessary. The jurisdiction also is responsible in its general education and outreach to educate generators if they do self-haul. How do they do that? What facilities do they take it to? How do they take it to the proper facilities? In the example that you gave, if you have a self-hauler that has what's called mixed organics load, they are required to take that to a high diversion organic waste processing facility where that material can be properly separated. And that's laid out in Article 7 in the self-haul requirements. It states that any self-hauler either has to source separate their materials and take it to a source separated facility, or if they choose to keep their materials mixed, they do have to take it to a high diversion organic waste processing facility. In the last part of your example, what happens if a self-hauler arrives at a facility and they have, it's a source separated facility and they have not separated it and it's all mixed? That is a great question that I'm not able to answer about how a facility deals with that. So we could do a follow-up with our facilities team and get back to you. Did that help?
That helped a lot, Cara.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kara. David Albertson, you are unmuted on our end. If you could go ahead and state your name, affiliation, you are free to ask your question. Okay. David Albertson asks, how can I get the information from the composting facility?
Thank you, David. I can take this one. I'm going to assume that he's referring to where you can find information for reporting requirements or various measurements that are required for a composting facility. I will say that look up in the 1383 regulations, section 18815.7F. If you read through that section and accompanying and additionally cited sections through the regulations, it'll give you specific details of what is required regarding reporting in RDRS for composting facilities. Thank you. Anybody else have anything else to add, please feel free.
Okay, our next question is from Andrew Palomares. Andrew does not have a mic, so he would like to know more information about the 10-day period for transfer facilities as I report to RDRS from a transfer station. Thank you, Andrew.
I can take this one as well. Again, to cite the regulations and also to mention the links that we provided in this presentation have a lot more specifics about the 10-day measurement period and the data that is collected and what is reported to RDRS. In the interest of time, it can be quite a discussion going through that, all the steps for the 10-day, but I highly encourage you to look through those links and look at the supporting materials that are available to make yourself more familiar and understand the details of the 10-day measurements that are required for transfer processors, or if you're talking about composters, that is also available. It's a bit different protocol, but I encourage you to look at those links and then view and read about them in the regulations, in 1382 regulations.
Thank you for that. Our next question comes from Ed Bortoli. Ed, you've been unmuted. Please state your name and affiliation and ask your question. Yourself muted, Ed, but I can also ask your question. Ed's question is the sampling for each jurisdiction, our transfer station receives gray bin waste from 4 different jurisdictions?
I can take that as well, and please, Kara, if feel free to chime in. My understanding is that it is for sampling is not per jurisdiction, is for the waste that is captured and brought to the facility to be. That is what is sampled. So it's not necessarily per jurisdiction. It's an overall sample. And I see you nodding your head, so I'm going to say that's correct.
Thank you. Next question is from Julio M. You are unmuted on our end. Please state your name, affiliation, and ask your question after you unmute yourself. Alrighty, Julio asks, will the online reporting forms be updated to include the new requirements?
Hi, Julio. Thanks for the question. Yes, RDRS will be updated with an additional organics recycling reporting tab, and there'll be basically the questions that were asked basically earlier in this presentation. Those data points will be required to be entered, and we'll give kind of like a preview on what that looks like, I think early next year, once that system has been developed.
All right, thank you for that. Our next question is from Jelena Hudson. Jelena, you have been unmuted. Please state your name and affiliation and ask your question. Okay, I'll go ahead and ask Jelena's question for her. She works for Vision Recycling. They recycle green waste as well as composting. Will they have specific forms that are required for reporting? They follow up that question with, what is the biggest change with the new requirements? We recycle biomass, and that's, I think, what they're asking for in terms of the change with the new requirements.
I'll just start off. Thank you very much for that question. I'll start off with what Stephen mentioned just a few seconds ago, is that we're going to update the system to reflect the data that is required to be captured into RDRS going forward. So that answered your question. Will there be specific forms that are required? And I'm not sure regarding the biggest change with the new requirements. I mean, as we've discussed, 1383 requires specific data to be captured and entered into our RDRS. And again, I highly encourage to look at those links and look at the regulations to become familiar with what is required to report. Again, as Stephen said, early next year, we will have a lot more specific about you know, the RDRS part of this reporting and what it may look like, and we'll reach out early next year to share that with everyone as well. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Cameron. Lisa Quello, we're back to you. You can state your name and repeat your affiliation. You are unmuted on.
Thank you, Lisa Quello, R3, and my question has already been answered. Thank you.
All right, our next question is from Elia Zavala. Elia, you are now unmuted. Please state your, oh, I apologize. That is not the right question. Carlos Chavez has no microphone. He is asking, would you please cite the definition of organic waste we should use when conducting measurements?
Thank you very much, Carlos, for your question. I would say, and Kara, correct me if I'm not speaking correctly again, the definition for organic waste that should be used is what is defined in AB 901 definitions, because if you're not required to report in AB 901 again, then you are not required to report in 1383. So I would defer to the AB 901 regulations for organic material. I hope that answered your question. If not, please let us know. Thank you so much.
Next question is from Caitlin Haberlin, who does not have a mic right now, so I will ask the question on their behalf. They ask, will local education agencies need to report on their organic waste generation?
So Cameron and Stephen, feel free to jump in as far as if an entity is subject to the 901 regulations. But with respect to the regulations, there's no reporting requirement on local education agencies to track how much organic waste they are recovering. So Stephen, Cameron, is there anything else you want to add with respect to determining if someone's required to report under 901?
No, I don't have a whole lot else. I think that's for the most part correct. Education, you know, schools and whatnot would be considered mostly generators, to my knowledge, and generators don't have a reporting obligation pursuant to the RDRS regulations by and large. So I think that's pretty spot on there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the question.
All right, our next question is a follow-up question from Julio, who does not have a microphone. They were going through the calculation of organic percentages, and the regulations requires, it says to jump from one section to another, to another, to another, and it still is not clear. Is there a way to publish a condensed version of how to test?
Yes, thank you, Julio, for that question. And this is a good point to reiterate again. CalRecycle has done a wonderful job of condensing all these things. And if you look at that relevant links slide, there are condensed versions with kind of picture graphics and what the calculations are and what you should do to get to that final number. You do need to report all step by step. These are our PDFs that are available to be downloaded. So please look at those links. They're very, very helpful. Again, thank you for that question. And that is a very important point. There is a lot of resources for folks to look through to see exactly what needs to be reported. Thank you so much.
All right, so we have about 15 minutes left. If there are any other questions that come in, we can answer those in the next 15 minutes. Until we get any more questions, I just want to remind folks that we will be sending a listserv message through the SLCP and RDRS listservs with all of the links that were presented today. So we will do that shortly after this webinar, so you'll have access to all of those links today. We will also be posting this recording and the PowerPoint presentation at a later date once those are ADA accessible, and we will try to do those as quickly as we can. And the last question that I see right now is the webinar tomorrow the same as today? No, we do have a webinar tomorrow, and that is on the record keeping requirements. That webinar is also, let me double check, at 10 o'clock. So that will be a 1-hour webinar on the record keeping requirements tomorrow, probably more relevant for jurisdictions, so city, county, special district staff. So I do not see any other questions. We'll give it a couple of minutes in case there's anything last minute right now. Steve and I did send out a link to the entire audience, so hopefully you can see that regarding how to subscribe to our listservs. So if you do not see that, please let us know. You can email the SLCP inbox if you don't know how to sign up for one of those listservs, and we'll make sure we get you that link. We have some questions on how to sign up for tomorrow's webinar. We will also include that in the follow-up listserv message to make sure you all have that information for those of you who would like to attend that webinar. And then Ashley Yee just posted the GoToWebinar link for tomorrow's webinar as well in our question pane, so hopefully you all can see that and access that right now. So I don't see any more questions coming in. If you have a question that you didn't think of today, feel free to email the RDRS at calrecycle.ca.gov inbox or the slcp.organics at calrecycle.ca.gov inbox, and we will get back to you. We also have some follow-up questions to get back to, so we'll get back to those of you who we owe responses to in about a week or so. If you don't hear from us, feel free to email us on either of those inboxes and we'll make sure we get back to you. So thank you so much, everyone, today for participating. We know your time is very valuable, so we'll give you back that 10 minutes of your time. We appreciate you being on here today. And we have one last question before we close out from Ruben. And so Steve and Cameron, I'm going to toss this over to you really quickly. Ruben is wondering when the new RDRS system will be up.
All right, well, RDRS is live and it has been since Q3 of 2019. I think your question is about the expanded suite of reporting pursuant to 1383, and that takes effect Q1 of 2022, I believe. So it will be like for transfer stations, it would be May that they would be required, I think, to submit the Q1 2022 reporting. So by then we'll definitely have the system, up and running, and we'll have additional trainings on how to go through that in RDRS. So definitely stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to those listservs. and keep an eye out for those additional trainings. Thanks so much, Ruben. And thanks everybody for your great questions today.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for your participation and time today. So with that, we will end the webinar, and thank you very much again. Have a great rest of your day.